Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a story that honestly goes way, way beyond sports. We're going to explore the life, the career, and the absolutely massive global impact of Lionel Messi. But look, we aren't just here to count his goals and list off his trophies, right? We're going to dig into the profound psychological resilience that allowed him to take some really deep, early physical and emotional vulnerabilities and transform them into unparalleled global greatness. It's really a story about how childhood trauma can literally be forged into absolute genius.
So I want you to start by just asking yourself this. How in the world did a 4'4" child become a global titan? Just think about the incredible contrast there for a second. Today, Lionel Messi is this towering figure in global culture. He's a titan whose name is recognized in literally every corner of the earth. But back when he was 11 years old, he was frail, he was tiny, and his future was completely up in the air. How do you bridge the gap between that profound physical vulnerability and becoming the single most decorated football player in human history?
Let's start answering that in Section 1, The Boy Who Stopped Growing.
To really understand his journey, we have to go back to his childhood in Rosario, Argentina. At age 11, young Leo faced a massive biological roadblock. He had completely stopped growing. He was diagnosed with growth hormone deficiency, which basically meant his pituitary gland wasn't producing enough growth hormone. Doctors told his family that without intervention, his height would probably cap out at around 4'7". And the treatment? Well, it was brutal, especially for a kid. He had to self-administer hormone injections into his own legs every single day. But going through that grueling routine actually instilled this deep, deep sense of self-reliance and discipline in him from a remarkably young age.
But of course, there was a massive catch. $1,500 a month. That was the cost of these daily treatments. Now keep in mind, Messi's father was a steel worker and his mother was a part-time cleaner. So for them, this was a completely crushing financial barrier. They just couldn't afford it long-term. Local Argentine clubs could clearly see the kid's talent, but none of them wanted to foot that massive medical bill. His literal physical growth and his dream of just having a normal life were entirely on the line. The family was desperate, and that desperation forced them to look overseas.
So at just 13 years old, incredibly desperate for a solution, Messi flies all the way to Spain for a trial at FC Barcelona's famous La Masia Academy. Just imagine the pressure on this child. He literally had to perform to secure his own medical future. And what does he do? He goes out and scores 5 goals, completely wowing the coaches in just 2 minutes. Barcelona's sporting director was so desperate to sign him right then and there before anyone else could swoop in that they drafted an agreement during dinner, on a restaurant paper napkin. That flimsy little piece of paper literally saved his future.
Which brings us to Section 2, Sublimation at La Masia. Okay, so solving his physical growth issue actually triggered a whole new massive emotional challenge. Separated from his mother and his siblings, young Leo felt incredibly isolated over in Spain. Cognitive behavioral therapists looking at his journey suggest he actually developed specific psychological schemas just to survive this period. To cope with being the vulnerable child experiencing severe homesickness, he developed what's called the detached protector. Basically, this was an extreme introversion used to shield his emotions. It was so extreme, actually, that some of his early teammates thought he was completely mute. He also developed the demanding parent schema, which is this relentless, intense perfectionist drive. But the moment he stepped onto the pitch, he immediately became the joyful child, experiencing pure, unadulterated freedom. And that brings up a really crucial psychological concept, sublimation. It's a defense mechanism where you take all of your anxiety, your pressure, your pain, and you transform it into a socially acceptable, productive activity. For Messi, the football pitch became his absolute sanctuary. Think about all the anxiety over his medical condition, the crushing financial pressure on his parents, the deep pain of being separated from his family. He took every single ounce of that energy and channeled it directly into his sporting genius. It's a fascinating look at how humans process trauma, right? It's a mechanism we all use, just playing out on a much, much grander scale.
Out on the field, that intense psychological drive fueled a really rapid evolution. When he first arrived in Spain, he was this scrawny kid who completely relied on raw, street-style skill to just beat entire teams all by himself. But his true genius was his adaptability. He managed to absorb the incredibly complex tactical demands of Barcelona. We're talking about intricate positional play, the triangles, the pressing. He essentially married his chaotic, raw Argentine street talent with a highly disciplined intellectual system of European football, and that combination was lethal.
Moving on to Section 3, the weight of Argentina.
Now, as he was busy conquering club football in Europe, a massive psychological burden started to emerge back home. He carried this impossible expectation to be the next Diego Maradona. And honestly, the timeline of his early international career is utterly brutal. He suffered these incredibly heartbreaking consecutive losses in 3 major finals. First, it was the 2014 World Cup final loss to Germany. Then, back-to-back Copa America final losses to Chile on penalties in 2015 and 2016. The weight of all this on that demanding parent schema we talked about earlier, that deep internal drive for perfection, was so crushing that after the 2016 loss, a completely devastated Messi actually went on TV and announced his retirement from international football.
Well, thankfully, he eventually returned. But he was fueled by a really deep psychological need for catharsis. As he famously put it, I needed to remove from myself the thorn of achieving something with the national team. See, because he left Argentina at just 13 years old, there were people back home who actually doubted his loyalty. So he had this profound, desperate need to prove his dedication to his homeland. He just wanted to finally be accepted by the very people he had to leave behind as a child.
Which leads us perfectly into Section 4, the ultimate World Cup triumph. Around 2019, pundits started noticing a real shift in him. Messi adopted a much more vocal, assertive leadership style with the national team, and it paved the way for this incredible progression of cathartic victories. Step 1 was in 2021, when he led Argentina to the Copa America title, beating Brazil right in their own iconic Maracanã Stadium. That massive win ended a 28-year trophy drought for Argentina and lifted a gigantic weight off his shoulders. Step 2 was dismantling Italy in the 2022 Finalissima. And then, Step 3, the ultimate prize, the 2022 World Cup in Qatar. His performance in Qatar was just, well, it was nothing short of legendary. In what a lot of people call the greatest final of all time against France, Messi scored twice. Over the whole tournament, he registered 7 goals and 3 assists, basically dictating the tempo of the entire competition. He even became the first player ever to win the Golden Ball, which is the award for the tournament's best player, twice. He was finally holding the one magnificent trophy that had eluded him for almost 20 years.
And now for our final chapter, Section 5, the global Messi effect.
With absolutely nothing left to prove in Europe or on the international stage, Messi made the move to the United States in 2023. And let me tell you, the data from this move is simply staggering. This was definitely not some quiet retirement tour. He arrived at Inter Miami as the reigning World Cup champion, and the Messi effect was absolutely instantaneous. Major League Soccer attendance surged from 10 million to a record 11.45 million. That's a 14% spike. Sponsorship revenue jumped 25%. We're talking about stadiums across America completely selling out, with 70,000 fans packing into massive NFL stadiums just to get a glimpse of him playing. He has basically single-handedly elevated the entire global perception of the U.S. domestic league.
But you know what's truly remarkable about this? He isn't just a mascot driving ticket in jersey sales. He's actually still dominating on the pitch. Even in his late 30s, he led Inter Miami to their first ever trophy, the Leagues Cup, and then followed it up with the highly prestigious Supporter Shield, which goes to the team with the best regular season record. He's entirely reshaping the tactical dynamic of his team and proving he's still maintaining his status as an elite, MVP-level playmaker.
So as we pull back and look at his entire journey, his evolution really brings everything full circle. Just think about where we started this explainer. A highly vulnerable kid whose working-class family couldn't afford the $1,500 a month he desperately needed for medical treatment. And today, he uses his immense wealth and the Leo Messi Foundation, working right alongside UNICEF, to fund healthcare, medical research, and education for vulnerable children who are facing the exact same terrifying hurdles he once did. It's a really beautiful full-circle moment. Which finally brings us to our closing thought. Shortly after winning the World Cup, Messi said, "The World Cup victory won over all the people of Argentina. Today, 95% or 100% of Argentines love me, and that's a beautiful feeling." He finally found that ultimate acceptance he had been craving ever since he was a 13-year-old boy crying alone in a Barcelona hotel room. It really leaves us with a fascinating question to ponder. Would Lionel Messi have become the undisputed greatest player of all time without the profound physical vulnerabilities and psychological traumas of his childhood? It's a powerful reminder that sometimes our greatest fragilities can actually become the very engines of our immortality. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep learning.